Even though we're waiting on parts, that doesn't mean that there's work that can't be done in the meantime, so stick around. Hey everybody, welcome back to the garage, and today we're going to work on kind of putting together the top end on the L83 here. We've got the pistons in, got the rods in, waiting on the camshaft and waiting on the torque converter. It's going to be another week or two for both of those items, but we can still go ahead, get the lifters in, get the heads back on, and pull the camshaft out as it is. But before we go into that, I've got a couple things that I want to say. First, thank you to all the subscribers out there. If you have not subscribed already, click the button down there, ring the bell. You don't want to miss out on the content, and check out the live show on Thursday night. On top of that, I'm super excited to welcome a new sponsor to the channel. We talked about it a little bit last Thursday on the live show, and I thought, what the heck? I've already bought a lot of parts from these guys. What if I reached out to them and said, hey, how would you guys feel about sponsoring some of the content on the channel? And yeah, ICT Billet is going to go ahead and come on board and sponsor some future content, which is really cool. We're going to be using some of their parts today and throughout the rest of the build, including this sweet ICT billet valley cover, I should say. And this is the one with the fuel pump, with the spacer. Very interesting. We'll talk about the spacer later on whenever we get into the camshaft side of things, because whenever you go to a camshaft that has a different fuel load, let me set this down real quick. Whenever you go to a camshaft with a different fuel load, you're getting more fuel pressure out of it, more flow. But what a lot of people don't understand is that the lobe is actually smaller. And so in order to get that increased flow and things like that, you have to use a shim. In fact, I've got a couple shims over here. One of them from GM, which is going to be, I believe, the 6mm shim. It's just that little cup in there. And this is actually a shim for an LS7 lifter or LS7 valve. And then Comp Cam makes an 8mm shim, same, design that goes on the lifter, as it were, for the high pressure fuel pump, because there is a small lifter at the back of the cam that rides up on that lobe and then actuates the plunger on the high pressure fuel pump. So whenever you go to a higher flow cam, you have to be aware that you have to shim these properly, because there has to be a little bit of preload on it, but you also don't want to bottom out the high pressure fuel pump, because either one of those things will kill the fuel pump very quick. The cool thing about it is, though, as I said, with the ICT billet set up, the valley cover, it has a spacer in there that can assist you in actually shimming things up. With the fuel lobe that we're running on the motion cam that we're going to be installing in this, we may be able to get by just without running that spacer, which will drop the fuel pump close enough to the new lobe in order to get the correct lash, as it were, on there. But if not, we can always run the spacer, which brings it up to stock height, and then use one of the lash caps that we have for doing that installation. I will do a video on that, touching on that whenever we get to that point in time. But for now, as I said, I want to give a big shout out to ICT Billet for jumping on board with the Goat Rope Garage. I have touted their products. I am a big fan of what they make. The price of what they have is second to none. It's hard to beat the product quality and just price of what they are putting out on the market. And in fact, recently I have been using, where is it? I've got all kinds of ICT billet bags. This is all stuff that I've bought from them myself, and they even offered to reimburse me for this, and I said, don't worry about it. I'm more than happy to support you guys, and I look forward to you guys supporting us in the future. But I've got water pump gaskets. I have the oil pressure tap for the valley cover, because it has that blocked off from the factory, and you just go in there. They have a spot marked on the valley cover where you tap it, and then this goes in some of the existing holes and will allow you to plug in the factory oil pressure sender. Then we will be using the oil cooler block off plate, and then on top of it, I went ahead and ordered some of the head dowels, because I know I've got 2 on here right now. I think the other 2 are probably in the head. We're going to find out today, but I wanted to have some spare ones just in case. The other thing I've been using a lot, and wish I would have bought a long time ago, is their heavy duty flywheel lock. This thing goes in place to the starter, locks down your flywheel. I did not use one of these whenever I did the balancer swap the first time. I threw this thing on there, pop the balancer right off with the balancer removal tool. We're going to be using this to lock the cam in place as we take the cam cover off and stuff like that to get to the access to the cam. So this tool, if you do not have one, you're doing work on a motor, this is worth its weight in gold. It's about 40 bucks, and this thing is a beefy piece of aluminum billet. And so I will put links to this down below. Make sure, go check out ICT Billet. If you have not already, check out the offerings that they have. Awesome products, really cool stuff. And keep your eyes peeled for future products in the future that we feature here on the garage. So what have we got going on today? Well, as I said, the pistons, the rods, they're all in place. We're waiting on the camshaft, so we're going to go ahead and get this camshaft out of here, which means we're going to have to pull the oil pump. I went out, listen, I'm not going to sell you on these. I went out and bought these pump alignment tools because everybody's like, you know, if the pump doesn't get put back in the right spot, the oil pump that is, it just, people are killing things because of that. So, you know, I went out, found a set of pump alignment tools. I thought, oh, hey, yeah, 50 bucks, that's not bad. They showed up and they're 3D printed out plastic. So I'm a little bit disappointed. I'm not going to talk about whose these are, but they've got less than $5 worth of material on this whole thing and they're selling them for 50 bucks. So steer clear of those. They don't list it as being 3D printed plastic on there. So if you have your doubts, reach out. But I will tell you that somebody has provided this file online. So if you have a 3D printer, you can print these yourself. If you don't have a 3D printer, you can download that file, and there are plenty of websites out there where you can submit the file and they will print them off for you. I found a set of these were about 20 bucks printed and shipped. So don't spend $50 for a 3D printed plastic part. And, you know, come on, guys. But that being said, what else do we need to do? Well, we need to go ahead and clear out our bolts for the heads, our bolt holes for the heads. And so I don't have a tap that goes down there enough, so I just built a chaser bolt out of one of the old head studs, or head bolts, and you just cut some grooves in there, and it allows you to run the thing down, clean out the threads so the threads are nice and clean to help, because these do not go through. Stuff can get trapped down at the bottom of it down in there, and the last thing that you want to do is to get bad torque readings whenever you're trying to torque your heads because you're butting up against something. Running these things down and then pulling them back out helps to clean the threads out. On top of that, we need to go ahead and fill up our tray and dunk our lifters in, get those soaked up. What we're using is a Morel replacement lifter. Just because LS7 lifters are next to impossible to find, and honestly the Morels are only about 80 bucks more than the LS7 set. And then of course we have the new LS7 lifter trays, which do not have the displacement on demand inside buckets, or side buckets I guess it would be, because normally your DOD's right here and then on the outside over there. So got to have new lifter trays, got to have new lifters whenever we're doing away with DOD. We'll also take a look at the cam whenever we get that thing out. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and soak my lifters in some oil, get them ready to go into the trays. The nice thing about the LS platform and the LT platform is the lifters will click into the tray. We can install the trays and not worry about the lifters falling into the block. That way we can go ahead and button up the heads on this thing, get the top side pretty much ready to go, and then all we have to do is jam the cam in whenever it shows up. Okay, we gave the lifters a good wipe down with some gunk parts degreaser and put them in a bath of 30 weight oil. As you can see, bubbles are coming out of them. That's just the lifters filling up with oil. It's a good idea to get some of the oil in there for first startup. Whenever we get done with this, we're going to go ahead and use some of the Permatex Ultra Slick on the shafts where it meets into the lifter channel, and then on the rollers themselves. So we'll have some additional lubrication during first startup. But we'll let these things soak. I'm going to run through the heads and clean out all the threads real quick. Okay, now that we've got the bolt holes cleared out, we've got the valley cover off so we can get access to the high pressure lifter back here. I'm going to go ahead and lock our flywheel or our flex plate in place right now because we're at top dead center number 1, dot to dot on the cam. Give us a nice reference point for whenever we come back in here. Got just two 13mm bolts. Okay, here's the lifter unit that I was talking about, and the lash cap actually goes on top of that. This is what engages the pump on the high pressure fuel pump. So we're going to go ahead and loosen this thing up, 13mm. Get this thing out of the way and just pull this unit out. You can see that it's got a roller on there that sits on the cam just like a roller rocker. So, okay, now that we've got everything locked down with our flex plate lock, we're going to go ahead and pop the bolts off for our oil pump. We've got our shims tightened down here, our alignment tools, it's kind of hard to call it an alignment tool, tightened down here so we know whenever we go back in that as long as we're pushed up against our alignment tools, we should be in a good location. There's also a connector on the bottom side under here that you have to unplug. We've gone ahead and done that. Okay, let's go ahead and just pull her off straight forward, and that is the oil pump. Simple. This is where the pickup picks from the oil pan mates to this surface. This is another reason why it's important to get this thing aligned properly so there's no gap on the pickup ring on there so you don't have an issue scavenging oil up. Okay, you can see down here we've got the timing chain retentioner. There's a way that you can pin this thing up. I didn't have necessarily a pin, so I used a very small Allen wrench. Squeeze this thing down, squeeze the assembly down with a pair of pliers or something, and then run the Allen wrench through. It'll keep tension off your chain, so it'll make it easier to pull off whenever it gets to the point. And I've got everything locked in place, so we should be able to just break the old bolt loose here, hopefully. This is a 24mm, by the way. Grab my bigger breaker bar here, give myself a little more torque on it. There we go. Once she lets go, she lets go. These camshaft bolts are not reusable. You're going to have to replace this thing. These are a torque to yield style kind of setup, so make sure that you have one ready to go unless you're doing a conversion over to a single bolt or 3-bolt non-VVT style cam gear. We're going to set this thing aside because once we get the timing set off, we're going to use this bolt to help us pull the camshaft out. Hold this in place, make sure nothing falls on us. Okay, there she is. Now we should be able to pull this out. And there it is. Easy access. Okay, with the retaining plate out of the way, let's go ahead and start our actuator bolt back in a couple threads to give us some leverage to pull this thing out. You've heard it a million times before. The big thing is just to make sure to pull the thing straight out. Don't wiggle it around any more than you have to. You don't want to score up the cam bearing faces. Okay. A couple of them spots got a little hairy. Definitely a tight fit. You can see this triangle lobe on the back here is going to be our fuel lobe. That's the one that the fuel rocker rolls on. And what you'll see on a lot of these cams is they'll go away from the triangle pattern to maybe a star pattern or something where you'll have 5 lobes instead of 3, but your total outside diameter is going to be smaller. And that's why I was talking about having to shim or run a lash cap to make sure that you kept proper preload. I don't know if I see anything that sticks out. They say that you can't run normal lifters on these because it'll be down in compression. I might have to go through and actually measure these lobes, see if the heights are the same and maybe if the angles are the same on them. I'd be interested to see. Should be able to isolate which ones are which on here pretty easily. But this one's done. This one's out of the way. This one's pretty much junk. Who cares about this one, right? Okay, so I've given everything a good wipe down again. Make sure everything's nice and clean since we're going to be doing the final assembly of the heads here. I'm going to go ahead and throw a little bit of Loctite on these retainer bolts. They're torqued down to about 100. I think it's 106 inch-pounds. But a little bit of Loctite won't hurt to keep them in place. Make sure that you're using the correct bolts. These things will have a little bit of a shoulder on them that sits down in the lifter tray itself that gives it a little bit of freedom to move to make sure that the lifters can properly do their thing. Okay, now that that's done, here comes the fun part, the messy part. We're going to click these lifters right into our trays. There's really no way of getting this wrong. There's only one way these trays are going to go in there, so keep that in mind. But we are going to pay attention to our oil alignment hole, and we're going to align them all towards the back of the block. It doesn't really matter because this whole valley is flooded with oil whenever the motor's running. And you might have to wiggle them to get them guided in a little bit, but once they start, it should slide kind of into place here, just like so. And there's 4 of them set in. We'll move on to the next 4. Now we've got our new dowels over here from ICT Billet that we can go ahead and insert into the block. Where'd you go, dowels? Not necessary. You can use your dowels, reuse your dowels. I bought these already, so I'm going to go ahead and use them. Might have to hammer these in. Got our new GM multi-layer steel gaskets here. Front. Idiot proof. Gotta love that. Heads up, Tick Performance, if you're watching this, don't use shredded paper as your packing material. It makes a god-awful mess everywhere. I don't even know how shredded paper got in this package for the head gaskets, but it managed to find its way in. There we go. She'll sit right down on the dowels. I've already gone through, cleaned up all the heads whenever I did the springs. And now for the fun part. Let's grab our ARP kit, start running some studs in here. Okay, whenever it comes to doing these bolts, pay attention for one. If you had the 1/2-inch Allen head one, that was the inside front of the driver's side, cylinder number 1. There is one bolt that ARP sends that's shorter that goes in that spot. Now be aware, whenever you're using these washers, there is a chamfered side of the washer that goes towards the bolt head, because that thing's supposed to sit down in there. On top of it, you want to use the lube that they provide on both the washer, the face of the bolt, and your threads. And that is so you get good torque distribution across this thing. You don't want any of these binding up whenever we're torquing the heads and causing those things to get out of spec. I'm going to go ahead and lube all these up, drop them in on this side, and then I'll fire the camera back up for going through the torque process. Okay, at this point in time, if you've done everything right, you should have moly lube on every single orifice, nook, and cranny of your body. If you don't, you must have messed something up. We're going to torque these things down, and this is a 3-step process. It doesn't matter if you're using factory bolts, aftermarket bolts like we are, ARP bolts or ARP studs. You want to tighten this down over a period of time, following a specific pattern, basically working from the inside and out in 3 separate rounds. The first one, we're going to follow the factory steps for the first 2 steps. The factory bolts are a torque to yield bolt, and so you would actually do a torque value of 59 foot-pounds, then you would go, what, 90, and what's the last one? And then finally 40 degrees. So you go through, do everything 59, everything 90, everything 40 degrees. We're going to go through, do everything 59 foot-pounds, 90 degrees of turn, and then we're going to be hitting our target of 115 foot-pounds as specified by ARP. So we'll start right here. And that is basically going to wrap up everything for today. That's a lot of work. That's a lot of work. Come back in, I'm going to put my lift plate back on top just to protect the top side of the motor, make sure nothing drops in. Same ordeal. I'll come and rag these off to make sure nothing gets into our intake ports and things like that. Just keep everything kind of buttoned up. Put the valve covers back on. Whew. With a bolt or two. And get everything sealed up, ready for the camshaft. So camshaft should be here in a week or two, hopefully sooner than later, so we can get this thing completely buttoned back up and ready to go back in the motor. Then we'll just be waiting on the torque converter. Got some stuff to do that requires some grinding and welding and stuff like that. I'm not doing any of that until this thing is buttoned up. Trying to keep the dust and debris down in the shop until then. But I'm going to catch my breath, get back to torquing. You know the drill. Thanks for stopping by the garage. ABT. Always be tuning.